We've just been subjected to years of fear-based political rhetoric, which leaves many wondering, where do we go from here? While Trump walked away with a second impeachment, he was acquitted of his role in the January 6th insurrection, sending a signal that we aren't accountable for our words. Or at least that he isn't accountable for those words. That's a problem. The rhetoric Trump used was regularly filled with fear-based persuasion. But before we get too far into this, let's define two important terms: rhetoric and fear. We'll use Aristotle's definition of both. In Book 1 of Rhetoric, Aristotle says that rhetoric may be defined as the faculty of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. In Book 2 of Rhetoric, Aristotle says fear is created when some bad thing is looming and when we feel powerless to avoid it. So, if we put these two definitions together, fear-based rhetoric is using whatever persuasive means you can to convince your audience that something bad is looming and that they are powerless to stop it. Now, I've already said that Trump used fear-based rhetoric regularly, and I'm fully aware that Trump isn't the only politician to make use of fear-based rhetoric. It's a favorite of politicians. But he is the most recent and one of the most prevalent examples. Let's take a look at just a few lines from some of his speeches which involved fear-based rhetoric. So when Trump said things like this, he knew what he was doing. He was using whatever persuasive means he could to convince his audience that something bad is looming and that they're powerless to stop it. He aimed to position himself as the hero we so desperately need for an imminent danger we can't possibly face on our own. And in doing so, he appeared to a very early and very powerful force that is both biological and social. It's fear. You see, fear is perhaps one of the most prevalent human emotions. But not just one of the most prevalent, it's one of the earliest. In her book, The Monarchy of Fear, Martha C. Nussbaum says, fear, genetically first among the emotions, persists beneath all and infects them all, nibbling around the edges of love and reciprocity. She references the work of Rousseau, who helped us to realize that the human experience does not begin as a democracy, but as a monarchy. A baby, fearing for her life, must make a servant of her caregivers or die. Along the same lines, Trump hoped to convince us that without his help, we were helpless. Now, some of us were able to fight those unethical and unbalanced appeals to fear by reasoning or even laughing our way to a more solid ground. But for some, his messages sunk in, and understandably so. Here's why. This is a picture of the human brain taken at the moment when fear is forming. Neuroscientists tell us that fear leaves lasting impressions in our brains. So these repeated messages alter not only our very brain makeup, but the way we see the world and ourselves and others. They create ruts in our thinking, and when that happens, when these are the literal pathways our brains travel, when fear and othering becomes the soundtrack of our lives, we begin to see and rationalize things like this. But here's the good news. While we can't completely shield ourselves from fear-based persuasion, While we can't erase the words that have already been spoken, we can replace them with better rhetoric. Like this.
Democracy can buckle when it gives in to fear.
When you know somebody's race, what do you know? Virtually nothing. You add to it all the stereotypical information and all the baggage that goes with race, but you don't know anything about that person just because you know race.
We can change our thinking. We can make new paths in our brains, ones that aren't forged in the fires of fear. It's called neuroplasticity. We can recognize unethical, fear-based persuasion for what it is, manipulative rhetoric that doesn't have the best of human interest in mind. And we can challenge it before it takes root in our minds or in others. We can have crucial conversations with friends and coworkers and loved ones and strangers on social media about what fear-based rhetoric is, and we can hold accountable anyone who uses it unethically. Because we are and always will be accountable for our words, because they change the way we think and live and interact. We can't forget that. One of the scariest things about fear-based rhetoric is that it tries to convince us that we don't have the power to be problem solvers, that we need a hero, that we have to look to others to make the change for us. In response to that, I want to leave you with these words from Andre Henry.
The real power is in all of us consenting to their rule. Donald Trump by himself cannot capture migrants, process them, separate their families, try them, produce fear-mongering media. He needs the cooperation of millions of other people. When we think about how do we change the world, a lot of people are looking for a messiah.
Right.
They're looking for another Dr. King
Exactly.
or something like that. And we do need leaders.
Right.
But the real power for change is with the people. It's not that one person can come and just change all of our hearts and minds, which is only half the battle anyway.
Exactly.
It's important,
Right.
but it's only half the battle. The real power is that no regime can withstand the resistance of 3.5% of the population. A massive study done by Erica Chenoweth and Maria J. Steffen in their book, Why Civil Resistance Works, studied over 300 conflict situations in the past century, and nonviolent movements and armed struggles and all these kind of things. And this was one of the things that they found, was that it only takes a committed few to organize and strategize and resist. And they found that no regime could withstand the sustained strategic resistance of 3.5% of the population. It's not about Dr. King. It's not about some messiah. It is about the 9 to 10 million Americans that care enough about anti-racist progress to do something about it. And so that is the person who says, okay, y'all about to go fill the streets? The kids can come over to my house, right? Oh, these organizers who are underpaid and under-resourced, okay, we got a home-cooked meal for them at my house. You know, it's us, it really is us learning to take care of each other. I've been thinking about the role, and I think what we're talking about is the role of civil society, right? Like, is the self-organized citizenry, understanding that we have the power to have any society that we want, and that we have the responsibility to pursue it.